Hey, we are back in the fly lab and it's winter, so it's time to tie up flies. So today I'm going to show you a way to deal with using a large partridge feather. So these feathers are great for these style of Kebari, like this one here. If I can get it in the vise. So if you look at this kind of Kebari, um, these feathers are great. I like the look of the partridge on them. The problem is when you get a skin, you usually end up with these kind of feathers. And if you look at the difference between, I don't know if you can tell, but if you look at the difference between the barbs on this feather and the barbs I've got on here, these are actually about the same feather. So there's a technique you can use to shorten these barbs on the feather so that when they end up in the place you want them on the hook, they're at a better length. They're at a shorter length for the relative size of the fly. So this is a size 14, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this purple YLI silk. This is a number 249. I'm going to use this size 14 fulling mill hook. Get this back in the vise here. And we're going to start by, so the first thing you want to do is you want to get your partridge feather and you want to just strip off all this fluff. There's this little extra feather piece, so just take that off and strip off the other pieces of this pretty far up. You don't really need a lot of this bottom part. I've actually got two feathers there. So we'll take all that off, get all these lower fibers, aren't really that good a quality, so you don't want them on there. Stick to my fingers like crazy. And so what you end up with is you're going to have a usable part of the feather, something like this. And if you look, generally you want the barbs of the feather, this one's actually a little shorter than that other feather, but you want them to be shorter than, maybe just shy of the bend in the hook. So you look at this one, I'm going to use a really long one here just to kind of illustrate. But if you take a look at this feather, take a look at how long those barbs are. See, they're huge compared to the size of the hook. And definitely much too long for what we're going to want on this size of a hook and for this particular fly. So we're going to pull all these fibers back. We're going to end up with just a little section here. You don't really need a lot of the short ones. You're going to want to take your scissors and just cut it so that you end up with just a little section right there on the end. That's going to be your tie-in anchor. I'm going to start the thread about right here because we basically need to take off almost from just in front of the point of the hook, from the hook point there, is about how much of this feather we need to take off because of its length. So next we're going to tie in our feather about right there at the hook point. I'm going to put a few wraps forward, a few wraps back, go back, and then I need the thread behind it, like that. So we're going to just put a few wraps behind the feather, like that. Great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab our pliers, turn these. So we want to wrap backwards, and I'm going to keep these barbs on the feather going forward like this. So just keep all these going forward here, just like that. You may not need this many feathers either. This is going to be but I kind of like having a ton on there because it just seems to float a little better, and I like the way it looks in the water. It's just a matter of preference. You can do a very sparse hackle, or you can do a very thick hackle, whatever you like. Okay, so now I've got all these feathers on here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just build up the back of this. And this is where it gets a little tricky, is getting a bit of a taper. I probably went a little too far back because we're going to be right here at the end of the hook, but that's okay. Because of how long this feather is, really kind of have to get quite a bit of it on here. So I just want to capture these fibers like this. I'm going to just make some touching wraps going forward. Try and just capture all these fibers evenly around the hook. Okay, now that I got them, what I need to do is just kind of fill in this section. I'm just going to clip off this little extra piece right here. Okay, now we just need to try and get some sort of a taper. I mean, you don't need a perfectly tapered body on your fly, realistically. I mean, how many bugs have perfect little bodies? They don't. They tend to be very misshapen. So I don't think you have to worry too much about getting a perfectly even taper. It's not that important, but it is a little harder to do when you're doing this particular style. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we want to take our Magic Wonder Wax, and we are going to apply some wax here for the dubbing. I'm going to use a Spectra dubbing, the Peacock. So we're going to take just a bunch of this and apply it right on. Spin that on there really well. I'll try and get it fairly tight because the fish teeth, especially brown trout, they will shred this pretty quickly, and we want it to last a bit. Okay, I'm just going to pull that forward, kind of go a little further back than where your hackle, because we don't want it to interfere with that too much. Okay, and I don't want to get into the hackle too much. I should still have quite a bit of hook point left there, as you can see. And then I'm going to take this little tool. This is a little CNF half hitch tool, and I'm just gonna go onto the end of the hook here and just grab all these barbs and just push them all back. The hardest part of this now is keeping the feathers kind of evenly distributed around the hook. They tend to clump up when you're doing it this way, but I'm just going to try and grab them as much as possible with the end of my finger. I'm going to move the thread up here and start to build a head. And, kind of look at it from the front, kind of try and get an idea of how your feathers are distributed. I've definitely got a lot of them over here on this other side, so I want to kind of just work them around here, pull them around, and then when you grab them with your fingers, just try and keep them roughly in that area. And again, you can use this tool to kind of help with that and keep them distributed around there. This is probably the hardest part of this, because what you want to do is you want to just build up, for a Tenkara style fly, you kind of want to build up a nice solid head right here, and that'll kind of just get the feathers flaring out more to the side instead of all just going straight forward like they were. So now if you look, they're going to be trying to hang back pretty hard because I want them that way for the moment, but they will flare forward after I finish this head. So I'm just going to do a couple of whip finishes here. I am using silk. Silk does tend to come apart, so 3 or 4 doubling up on that whip finish will help. Okay, so now if I just pull these forward, that's it. We've got a pretty nice size hackle on that. Definitely much better than what we would get if we were, those feathers would basically be unusable if you were trying to do like a traditional hackle where you start applying the feather right onto the head of the fly. I mean, they would just be huge. So this one might be kind of a good example, but I mean, you can see how much longer those fibers would be. We cut it by probably 30%. And I think that just makes a much better size for it. And I still get to use those giant feathers off my partridge skin when you start running out of all those tiny ones. So that's it. Thanks for watching. We'll see ya.